My name is Lisa Jackson, and I work for West Care Foundation. And I currently am the Vice President of Grants interim because it's the way we're slow about doing things. But I've been in this position for, well, they hired me in 2017, and basically it's the same position. The title has changed, but it's the same position of which is actually supervising their grant writers from across the
Awesome.
country. Yeah, I think I mean, the truth is I've been writing grants almost since I started working. Um, I was a, I was hired to run a small program out of college um, that transported elderly, and it was grant funded, and therefore I had to write my grant when it became renewable. So in some ways, I've been doing this since I started working, but I did have other responsibilities. I supervised volunteers and actually scheduled all the transportations. And because it was a small program, I was under, and instead of a program supervising me, they just said, "Oh, you grant writers supervise her." So when the first time I wrote my renewal, they said, "Oh, this is pretty good." And so when they had a small grant come in, they would say, "Hey, Lisa, why don't you give this a shot? And then, we'll edit it." And so, from there on, at some point I quit being the supervisor of this small program and was writing grants. So, not what I really intended to do, but I can say that I had already figured out that while I was had a degree in psychology and was thinking at one point I would become a psychologist. I had already figured out I didn't really want to do direct services. I didn't. I wanted to be involved. I wanted to be in administration. So this was a perfect path for me to begin in the administration of a nonprofit without being directly involved with clients, but still having an impact. Um, I worked in a area of senior. When I started, I was working for a senior service agency, and what I found is that I would get a person, a group to a certain point, and they would become overwhelmed with the amount of money that I'd bring in, or with the amount of contracts that they had to deal with. They would be small, and I would need to really, I'd say, I'm going to move on and go and find someplace else who needs my services, because they would say, let's not write anything more. You can supervise this grant, or you can, be a project manager, or, something like that. You can be a planner. And that's not what I wanted to do. I'd kind of chosen my field and I kind of wanted to stay there. And so I would basically move to another position. And so I found my skills would be transferable to a variety of human services type programming. And that's what made it good work for me. So I worked in deaf services, I worked in senior services, I worked in youth and family, I worked in a variety of other fields, substance abuse, all kinds of different fields, so that it takes a while to learn the funding locations and information about the type of programming. But once you get that, grant writing is the same in each of those fields. I mean, the basic mechanics anyway. Well, I can tell you that I work for an agency called Operation PAR. And in that agency, um, I started off as a grant writer, and I got basically became the supervisor of grant writers, and there were two of us, two other people besides myself. So that, but we had quite, we actually talked about it as being one of the best training grounds because we talked about it as being an assembly line. We need somebody to do this, and we need somebody to do this, and we're going to put this grant together. And we did a lot of grants for a relatively small set of people. And in that field, it was actually substance abuse. So in that grouping, we had budget people who did our budgets and somebody that helped. We would go to the university to get help with evaluation, and we had someone who would go and advocate for our grants at the federal level. Um, During that time, I traveled to DC a lot. I mean, I would go 2 and 3 times a year. Back then, the federal agencies would have these big conventions just to show off their money. And they would basically be like a sales convention where they'd come and they want to shake your hand and try and encourage you to go after their money, because they wanted to show that there was a need and that there was a lot of people. The more applications they got, the better they looked to the people who were allocating their dollars. So, it became quite the assembly line. I got opportunity to work with federal employees that for years I depended on to go back to and talk to them about what's coming out next year and what opportunities. I saw them do things like make trips to programs to see who's doing the best, the brightest, the most innovative. And sometimes they would come to our agency and we'd talk. And I learned a lot about the goings on of grant writing that was just more than just the mechanics of grant writing. And that was the best job I ever had. And even to the point of when I came and applied for this job, many of the people that I had interacted with in the previous job either worked here, knew somebody here, and was very helpful in obtaining this position. This position, well, gee, it it is really, there's lots of variety. I mean, we work in 16 states, 3 territories, 3 countries, and I write for places like Argentina, Guam, um, the Virgin Islands. So, there's lots and lots of diversity, and working with people across the country. I get to go to meetings with people in Washington State and turn around and go have a meeting with somebody in the Keys in Florida. So, you just can't, there's no lack of differences. There's no lack of opportunities. There's all kinds of things to learn about different parts of the country. And I love that. I mean, it really does keep you, engaged. Of course, the big thing about this is that that you're helping people behind every one of these grants, and that there's a lot of people in the world who would be having greater problems, having more difficulties, having less success if it wasn't for the fact that we're writing grants that enable us to hire people who really can be one-on-one with them. And so, I feel like I'm at least a small peg in this big machinery that provides assistance to the world. Well, I think even my staff don't realize how much data we generate and how much data there is. I mean, of course, we're in 16 states, and you figure out, I mean, I collect all kinds of data about every aspect of a grant, awards, denials, the amount of time it takes to write it, the how long does it take to write a page? How long does it take for you to put together a federal grant? Those are things that I collect and report on to a variety of um, staff, to a variety of funders, and data is going to be something that the future is going to be built on. And I think that people don't realize how much information you can provide by just analyzing it, collecting it, and putting it back out there. One of the really good workshops I went to at the conference last year was return on investments, because it just really showed ways to show how important your work is and how important it is in return to the agency, to the community, to society. I just really enjoyed that particular workshop, and that and it affirmed all the data that I collect. Well, I mean, I do go to the GPA conference almost every year. I think I've missed 3 out of the 20 some years you guys have been around. Um, and I mean, I tell this to everybody, that there is just nothing like walking into a room full of grant writers, people who understand what you do. So often, grant writers are a one-person shop or a two-person shop in an agency, and to come into a room where there's almost 600 people that know what that feels like, that's a wonderful feeling. However, the other piece is, of course, I have to keep up on, the normal things, such as the topics that my agency is involved with, substance abuse, um, things of policy and procedures, regulations. Those are things that are critical to my position, because I'm the person in the agency they come to and say, "Hey, do we have to do it this way? Can we give incentives to our clients? Will the federal regulations allow that?" So I need those kinds of trainings, and I get a lot of them from GPA, but there are other sources that, around. And of course, then ways to crunch the data is probably my greatest challenge, because, I'm not uh, computers are something that I actually try to keep up with, but it's not where I started. I actually wrote grants longhand when I first started. So, it's been an evolution process that okay, I need to learn something new. All the new grant portals, everything grant has to be uploaded now into some grant portal. As a matter of fact, we consider the people who actually request hard copies to be, you know, dinosaurs. No, I mean, there's obviously there needs to be a certain knowledge about grant writing, and there has, I mean, at this point, there have to be a certain amount of data ability. I am a GPC certified grant professional, but it's not required. And our grant, often our grant positions are advertised as preferred GPC, but it's not a requirement even for the agency's writers. Well, I've had a couple of really good, I mean, I've had several over my career. I had uh, a couple of really good ones. I remember Janet George was her name, because she had two first names, Um, and she's the one that the first woman I worked for, who was the planner and the grant writer, who kept saying, "Here, try to write this one, try to write that." And before I knew it, I was a grant writer, and I wasn't going to be running programs anymore. I was going to be writing. So that person was critical to my decision of how to get into administration, and how to make my mark. And I can never thank her enough. And it's interesting, because she lives right here in the community, but I hardly ever see her anymore. It's just amazing to me that at one time we saw each other constantly, but time does move on. um, the Another person that was really critical to me was an individual who's actually in politics in our region. But one of the things that and she was a program head, but she had she was working on the she had a job at city council. Um, she'd run for election and been a city council member. And what I saw from her is all the things that came at her from city council and from the community and the citizenry, and how she was able to handle it with grace and skill. She was very intelligent. She still is. I mean, she's still here, and she actually is on our board of county commissioners at this point. But she's retired from social services and is now a politician full time. But I mean, I really do appreciate some of the things that I saw her handle and how she handled it well. And that's something that as grant writers, we get things thrown at us a lot, and we get asked to do things that are like, do I really want to do that? And how do I handle that? I mean, one of the questions in our interviews is how will you feel about if you're asked to write about sensitive topics such as sex offenders and providing services to sex offenders? Some people are very offended by that, but that's something that they still need help, no matter who they are. There's ways that we can help them. There's things we need to do, and we need to learn to do it gracefully and graciously and help where we can. So those are two of my mentors that helped me a lot. Yeah, as far as mentoring, I have mentored people. It's harder to do during times of COVID. You don't get out much. You don't talk to people much outside of a Zoom or we have a program called Blue Jeans that we use. So I don't really get an opportunity to see people outside of work much. But prior to that, I mean, I've hired people and brought them forward. I've also mentored people who were in like our grant group. I am a member of the grant professionals of Tampa Bay and have worked in that arena quite often to provide some assistance and just give everybody a little bit of this is the way it's been done. Yeah, I'm the historian. I've been around way too long, so all I can do is really tell you, well, back in the day we wrote grants by hand, and now, of course, we have to know how to do it via portals. So, different strokes. Sure. Well, I think this is a lesson I've learned over and over. Unfortunately, sometimes you get too comfortable, but I have moved in my job. And as I, started in this interview, I said I've worked in senior services, I've worked in deaf services, I've worked in family, and I mean, and sometimes it requires you to make a change. And I can tell you that there were times when I made a change and I was scared to death or I was very upset. I didn't want to do it. But each and every time, it has really helped me. It's advanced my career. It's advanced my salary. It's advanced my authority. And I think that's something that, depending on your comfort level with change, making changes sometimes is what really needs to happen for you. Um, I mean, I can't remember a time that I didn't, in some way, improve my lot in my career by making a change. I mean, even to the point when I'd been with the company for a very, very long time, and there were significant changes, new CEO, all kinds of things, and had to leave a company after many, many, many years. I still ended up getting a better job, more authority, more salary, the whole works, just by making that change. And so I think we have to be very careful about getting too comfortable, but we also have to be careful about being afraid of change. And there are times when it'll work for you. It it's like building wealth. Sometimes you have to make risk to build that wealth. And and in my career, I consider that one of my strongest, uh, wealthiest, richest part of my life.